Merci beaucoup. Merci tout le monde. Il n'y a toujours pas de manifestants, non? Parfait. Écoutez, non. C'était rhétorique comme question. Écoutez, c'est vraiment un plaisir pour moi d'être ici, surtout pour parler d'un sujet qui m'occupe et me préoccupe. Vous comprendrez que comme ministre de la Cybersécurité et du numérique, l'intelligence artificielle fait partie des sujets les plus importants qu'on a à traiter, pas simplement au gouvernement du Québec, bien sûr, mais surtout et aussi au gouvernement du Québec. Parce que pour moi, l'intelligence artificielle, et si on combine ça avec d'autres technologies, c'est un rendez-vous que l'humanité ne peut pas manquer. Et je m'explique. Vous savez, dans notre histoire, il y a des jalons importants. Je me contenterai de peut-être en souligner deux, où un jour, l'être humain a découvert la fission nucléaire. Et là, on ne s'est pas posé la question collectivement, qu'est-ce qu'on pouvait faire avec ça? C'est devenu une course à l'armement. Et aujourd'hui, le monde possède assez d'armes nucléaires pour éradiquer la planète plusieurs fois. Un jour, l'être humain a travaillé la génétique. Et là, on s'est posé des questions. Où est-ce que ça nous amène comme société? Qu'est-ce qu'on va faire avec ça? Qu'est-ce qu'on ne devrait pas faire avec ça? Ce qui fait qu'aujourd'hui, cloner un être humain partout dans le monde, c'est interdit. Cloner des cellules souches pour traiter un grand brûlé, aucun problème. Donc, quand on fait face à des défis comme ça, on a une obligation collectivement de se demander comment on va l'utiliser. Et pour moi, l'intelligence artificielle, c'est le plus grand défi auquel l'humanité a fait face. Et je m'explique. Pour la première fois, l'être humain pourrait ne plus être la forme d'intelligence la plus évoluée sur Terre. Pour la première fois, l'être humain pourrait voir une forme d'intelligence excéder ses capacités. Et si vous combinez ça à l'informatique quantique qui amène potentiellement une capacité de calcul qui excède de loin la nôtre, et là, vous avez quelque chose qui nous amène ailleurs. Et vous savez, ça me fait penser à une anecdote. Un journaliste qui demande à un scientifique, « Croyez-vous en Dieu? » Le scientifique dit non, mais ça s'en vient. Alors, comme société, on ne peut pas faire l'économie d'un débat. Et comprenez-moi bien, l'idée ici, c'est pas de faire peur. C'est pas de dire il faut arrêter le développement de l'intelligence artificielle. Il faut ralentir. Non. L'idée, c'est de se dire l'intelligence artificielle, oui, mais pour qui et comment? Et ça, c'est les questions auxquelles on doit répondre. Et là-dessus, je suis assez fier de vous dire que le gouvernement du Québec a posé des gestes assez importants. D'abord, comme il a été dit, on a créé un ministère de la cybersécurité et du numérique. Pourquoi? Parce qu'on pense que ça prend un vaisseau amiral, une entité centrale qui va coordonner les actions des différents ministères et qui va aussi avoir à répondre à ces questions-là. L'intelligence artificielle, oui, mais pour qui et comment? Ensuite, en 2021, j'ai eu le privilège de déposer une stratégie d'intégration de l'intelligence artificielle. Le gouvernement du Québec est un des premiers gouvernements au monde à avoir fait ça, et j'en suis fier. J'en suis fier que ce soit fait au Québec. Mais récemment, on est allé plus loin dans notre réflexion. On a nommé le Conseil de l'innovation pour avoir cette réflexion. Comment on va intégrer l'intelligence artificielle et pour qui on va intégrer l'intelligence artificielle? Et le Conseil de l'innovation a déposé un rapport extrêmement pertinent, dense et, je dirais, rigoureux, qui s'appelle « Prêt pour l'IA ». Je vous invite à en prendre connaissance parce que la réflexion qui a été faite par le Conseil de l'innovation nous amène dans cette zone de réflexion-là dont on ne peut pas faire l'économie. Alors évidemment, il y aura d'autres actions à prendre en compte. Il y aura d'autres actions à poser. Il faudra un cadre législatif, bien sûr, mais le Québec ne peut pas être seul. Vous savez, le Québec se classe au 7e rang mondial pour les États au niveau de l'intelligence artificielle les plus avancés. Ça amène une responsabilité. Ça amène évidemment des possibilités, mais ça amène une responsabilité. Maintenant, évidemment, l'intelligence artificielle nous amène une vaste gamme de possibilités, que ce soit en cybersécurité, que ce soit en recherche que ce soit sur la gouvernance, d'aide à la décision. Et c'est exactement le genre de réflexion que que vous devez avoir ici et partout. Parce que la vraie question à laquelle on doit répondre, c'est l'intelligence artificielle doit être au service de l'humanité et l'humanité ne doit jamais être au service de l'intelligence artificielle. Donc, l'intelligence artificielle, oui, mais pour qui et comment? Merci beaucoup tout le monde et bonne conférence.
Thank you, Minister Caire, for your commitment to emerging technologies. Your leadership in innovation and digital transformation is positioning our nation as a leader in the digital age. Your efforts in advancing digital literacy and cybersecurity are truly inspiring. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Marie-Astrid Dubant. I'm the Executive Director of CyberCap. For over 20 years, CyberCap has supported 50,000 young people in staying in school and finding their path. Through career exploration and digital citizenship and specialized programs such as cybersecurity and AI, we actively combat dropout rates and promote educational success. Our impact has been profound, and now we are expanding CyberCap province-wide to empower even more youth across Quebec. Today, we delve into a conversation of vital importance, decision-making in our increasingly complex digital age. Natural disasters, global health crises, geopolitical tension, these aren't just headlines. They are stark reminders of the urgent need for informed, effective decision-making, often under immense pressure and with vast amounts of data at our fingertips. Yet, this is where our conversation takes a truly fascinating turn. Because with this complexity lies remarkable opportunity, an opportunity embodied by the very technology we gather to discuss. Artificial intelligence. AI is now here to replace human intellect, but to serve as a powerful ally, capable of analyzing those mountains of data, uncovering hidden patterns, and helping us anticipate and mitigate risk with incredible precision. And to guide us through this exciting landscape, we have an extraordinary panel. We're honored to have Chad Lesch, the Senior Vice President of Strategic Project at Crisis 24. Chad's journey from the Central Intelligence Agency to the forefront of AI-driven risk intelligence is nothing short of remarkable. His expertise in the intelligence gathering now helps create a safer world for clients through advanced AI software that provides geopolitical intelligence to commercial business. Welcome, Chad. We're also joined by Andrew Eppich, at the helm of Equinix Canada, brings a broad understanding of the technological infrastructure foundational to AI. Now, bridging the theoretical and practical is Dr. Fatih Nayebi, heading Data and AI Initiative at Aldo Group and serving as faculty lecturer at McGill University. Fatih brings his expertise to bear on the real-world application of AI for strategic decision-making, always with an eye toward responsible and ethical implementation. Welcome, Fatih. And finally, no conversation about AI would be complete without addressing the crucial legal and ethical considerations, a task we've entrusted to Charles Morgan, a leading legal mind in cyber and data at McCarthy Tétrault, will guide us through the complex legal and ethical conversations surrounding AI. So let's begin this vital conversation, exploring how we can work hand in hand with AI, not as a replacement for human intellect, but as a powerful ally in building a safer, more resilient world for everyone. So as a first question, I would love for the group to address how can AI enhance human decision-making in crisis? And I would invite Dr. Fatih, if you can please provide some data about it.
Yes, absolutely. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Marie-Astrid. It's a great pleasure to be here and talking about AI and bringing the experience that I have as a teacher at McGill University and also as the lead of data and AI at the Aldo Group to the table. At the Aldo Group, we empower our human beings, our teammates, the people with AI capabilities, not replacing them. And that's the key and the most important topic that we all need to talk about. while ensuring the responsible and ethical AI practices are followed. Today, decision-making is not easy because 90% of the data that has been produced just in the last 2 years, the data volume is going and getting increased very fast. And it's estimated that by 2025, more than 400 exabytes will be created every day. And exabytes, there are 18 zeros in an exabyte. And also estimated by 2025, globally, we will create and consume data that will exceed 180 zettabytes. So there are 21 zeros in a zettabyte. And as human beings, you would imagine that it's going to be very hard to process all that data and to use it for decision making. That's why it's very important to have the right computation power to be able to analyze that data, to also to be able to store it accordingly. But this will require a significant amount of computation. Now, there are 2 semiconductor companies in the top most valued companies in the world that are just providing semiconductors because everyone is in the race to get a hang of them. Private sector, also governments, they have many incentives and investments to be able to reach out to that computation power. The computation power is not going to be sufficient. We will need to be able to have the right algorithms and applications to get the value out of that data. There are many use cases, including the real-time data analysis that my co-panelists are going to be talking about. There are also scenario simulations that are required for decision-making. We need predictions and also prescriptions to be able to find out the best possible outcomes, to be able to find out the best possible decisions. And finally, automation of the routine tasks is going to help the productivity across the globe. And generative AI is going to be playing an important role on that one.
Thank you, Chad. Would love to hear from you.
Thank you. It's hard to follow the expertise that was just shared there, and I think I might be able to give perhaps a more basic practical application of what this might look like in a particular industry. So while the kind introduction was there, my name's Chad Lesch. I work for the company Crisis 24, which is a GardaWorld company that's responsible for producing risk intelligence, head of state level medical support, personal protection, and crisis consulting for half of the Fortune 500 companies around the world. Needless to say, we have our hands full. My personal role has to deal with artificial intelligence, predictive analytics, special projects for our CEO, our strategic partnership with Palantir, and then platinum level intelligence that we're able to produce with all of the above before that. So basically our job is to help the helpers, people across the world. We're beset with a series of polycrises. How can we make use of all this information that's streaming in and translate it into, at the end of the day, something that is digestible and actionable by the end-line user? So I want to talk about a little bit of that and then move on. So for us, we use artificial intelligence to provide 360-degree geopolitical intelligence reporting. What I mean by that is some of it is forward-looking, predictive analytics, or what we like to say is anticipatory intelligence. Certainly real-time reporting, which we'll talk a little bit more later, and then certainly historical due diligence. I say, although we're forward-looking, the only thing we learn from history is that we don't learn from history. So there's some real gems in there. So companies obviously require this information to make the best possible decisions to, number one, protect their people, drive revenue, and improve resiliency. So how do we use AI in this specific use case to do that? And I'd like you to try to forget my use case and think more about how this might apply to you in your specific business model. So first, we talk about data. I can't count the zeros, like I ran out of fingers and toes that my colleague shared, but there's a lot, and it's growing. So it's too much for a human being to be able to digest and make sense of. So we use something called natural language processing, which in layman's terms, which I am very much one of, is basically the ability to read sentiment in text, understand, what is being talked about, what is the, how do we categorize this, summarize it, and basically choose whether or not this is of relevance to our specific use case. My senior deep learning engineers like to joke that it's very hard to determine between a headline that says, this movie is the bomb, or there is a bomb at this movie theater. Well, it's easy for us to differentiate that. It's harder for machine learning, although we certainly have. We got that one covered. Where does a human fit into that? The natural language processing is programmed by humans. So we determine threshold, we determine what's relevant, what's not relevant, and what we choose to see. The other piece then is, after we have this influx of data coming in that's been filtered down by natural language processing, how can we make sense of it? Because we're still in the multiple zeros. I'll leave it at that. Basically, what we use is large language models using a RAG architecture. Now, a RAG architecture is AI speak for using preset data pools to prevent hallucinations. Sometimes ChatGPT, other, very open large language models, because they're so broad in scope, they can have difficulty with some questions and make up answers. When you're very highly trained to what to look for and how to interpret, you're able to effectively eliminate that. So that is a really good use case of how can we pick, kind of the relevant data points we want to see, understand what we are, and then combine them together to get a digestible summary. That's the big thing. How can we get an actionable insight to another human who then is making decisions and not spending all their time researching data? We like to get people from the what happened, and more importantly, into the so what, the now what, and the why. And the human being is responsible for that programming, that training, that modeling of the large language model of how to interpret events. In our case, how that relates to geopolitical intelligence, business resiliency, et cetera, and any other type of industry would be very specialized for their needs. So bottom line, this is one small use case. I apologize, it was long. But what we get from it is what we didn't have before: unprecedented speed, bespoke analysis, and then just digestible information that can take you out of the research mode and into the decision-making mode.
That's very insightful. Thank you so much. Charles, as a, perspective, your perspective on it.
Sure. So you mentioned that I'm a lawyer, but I'm not going to talk a lot about the law. I was, a few years ago, I was the president of the International Technology Lawyers Association, and in that role, I launched a project to write a book on for a global policy framework for responsible AI. And in that context, we looked at some of the core principles that are being used as guardrails, and core principles that we're now seeing, for instance, in the EU AI Act that's been finalized, in the draft AI and Data Act here in Canada. Just about every regulatory framework in the world is being built around the same core principles of accountability, transparency, explainability, reliability, safety, the principles that we laid out. We and others, obviously. But the point is, I'm not going to get into the details of the law. I'm going to stay at the high level of broad principles when I talk about these things. And I thought to address this first question, I would drill down on two concrete examples that are very familiar to me of how AI can enhance human decision-making power in times of crisis. And the first is something that I live every day. I'm among other things, the co-lead of our firm's cyber data group. And so think about a cyber incident. The law requires that when a cyber incident occurs, you have to notify, if there's a real risk of significant harm to individuals, you have to notify the regulators and the people concerned within a very short lapse of time. How do you do that? Cyber incidents often involve an attack or exfiltration of data from unstructured databases. So in a structured database, you've got a nice Excel spreadsheet with everybody named, and we know who it is, where we know absolutely everything about them. But in an unstructured database, it's very hard to put all those pieces together. And the law requires that within a very short period of time, you determine who's been affected, what jurisdictions, what types of personal information has been impacted, and then that you provide notice to all these people. Getting that information as a human is almost impossible, or it takes far too long. So our law firm uses automated tools that are able and are trained through reinforcement learning to find the core data that is required. And I just want to reinforce that reinforced learning, because it's not something where you just sort of plug and play and say, oh, we'll just set this bot onto a machine and find the answer. We do sampling, we test the sampling, we retrain, and we're able to get the core information that we require after a process of reinforced learning and training of the models. So that gets us the data that we need in a very short period of time. Another example that you're all familiar with, and I don't want to bring you back, to bad memories, but think about the beginning of COVID and the beginning of the pandemic. Think about before there was a vaccine. How were public health authorities trying to respond to the fact that thousands of people were dying? In the end, millions of people died, and there was no fix, there was no vaccine. The first effort to address the public health crisis was to develop contact tracing technologies. And you remember, we were all encouraged to download an app that would say, okay, well, I don't know who you are, but 3 days ago, you and I were in contact with each other. I got COVID yesterday, so you may have COVID also tomorrow. And you should be informed about that. Well, the problem was, among other things, people didn't download the app. They didn't trust it. They didn't trust government, right? They didn't trust people with that personal information. And so one of the things that was interesting about AI tools that were developed very rapidly, incredibly rapidly within that context, and Mila was a research institute that was very much involved in this, was that they were able to use AI to enhance the ability to derive insights from a limited amount of information. Because the first generation of contact tracing tools only worked if 70 or 80% of the population actually downloaded them and used them. And there's no way we were anywhere close to that. But the COVID app developed by Mila could develop and derive and provide for public health authorities actionable insights if only 10% of the population used the technology. So, a fabulous tool. Again, it didn't work. People didn't buy into it. There's a big trust issue. And we'll get more to the sort of the AI governance requirements. But, anytime you're talking about the collection and processing of massive amounts of personal information, people get very alarmed, and they get very concerned about the impact on their autonomy and whether people are actually using that information in the best interests of the individual.
Thank you very much, Charles. That's really important to see how AI can help make important decisions. Those are a great example. Andrew, would love to hear your perspective on this.
Yeah, and I so appreciate the introduction when you called me a generalist. A CIA operative, a genius, and a lawyer. When I told my kids that I was coming to Montreal, they giggled a little bit because obviously I wouldn't fit into an F1 car. But then when I said I was going to be in a panel with a CIA operative, a genius, and a lawyer, they thought it was an equal non-fit. So buckle up. I'm your pragmatist that's going to try and kind of connect the dots to the value that I think that we can bring foundationally to the set of topics that we're talking about here. Andrew Eppich, Managing Director for Equinix in Canada. We foundationally provide the infrastructure that is the digital platform where all of this data intersects and resides. So our largest customers, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, etc. Our largest enterprises, like the large banks across Canada, or the enterprises that are born in digital, like your Ubers, your Teslas, etc., all find a space of collaboration within the 260 buildings that we have in over 32 countries around the world. And the instantiation of that data's value comes from the interconnective tissue that those participants find within our centers. So it's the network effect. It's the idea that every additional participant will enrich the value of that ecosystem. And I think with AI, the profound opportunity is to understand that with every additional input of data, as diverse as it is, will enrich the model or the machine. So in humble service to these different workloads, these different use cases, Equinix provides that underpinning, that infrastructure to basically allow for that to work. So the other key comment to make right out of the gate is that AI doesn't happen in isolation. So there needs to be a place where this intersection point happens. It is location aware. It's specific to the nuance and the context of where that data is created and perhaps monetized or realized for its value. But I think equally importantly is basically the idea that it needs to be in a secure and a private place that has rules based around it to access it. So think of it as the underpinning, think of it as the infrastructure provider that ultimately foundationally allows for a lot of these workloads to take place. And I could be humble myself, but not on behalf of the company. 25 years in it, NVIDIA comes to the market in a pay-for-use way and picks Equinix to come along for that enablement. So we're right at the heart of AI as we're seeing it kind of burgeoning out into the industry.
Thanks.
Thank you, Andrew. And Minister Caire spoke about it, how important human factor is. So my next question would be, what human factors are critical to ensure safety in a world co-piloted by AI? And I would love to hear from you, Chad, to a perspective of security, perhaps.
Sure. I think there's a classic saying, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And in this age of AI, I think it's very much perceived as the hammer, and everybody wants to hit everything with it. And I think a better metaphor is that it's a tool, and the tool has some amazing utility in certain spaces, but it is also not the end-all be-all. So being able to find that balance when you turn on the news and it's AI this and AI that, and it's, I think we're kind of at peak AI forever right now, and I think it'll normalize. But just a couple of short points. I think it's always important that humans are the one using the tool, not being used by the tool, if that makes sense. So we can really accelerate with artificial intelligence the access to real-time data, bespoke analysis, looking forward, looking backwards, et cetera. But at the end of the day, that gets fed to a human being to make decisions. And that's not just an ethical consideration. I think it's also a pragmatic approach I like to think of myself as a pragmatic as well. Most of the time, unless it's sports seasons. But anyhow, that I think is an important distinction. This was something that was touched on before, certainly data security and info security. It's really important that where we keep any information that is kept conforms to all, not just legal guidelines by the countries in which we're operating with, but also moral and ethical ones. Just because we could doesn't necessarily mean we should. So making sure you're kind of ahead of the law, follow the law, but also be a good person. Like Google used to say, do no evil. I think they kind of dropped that, but no comment. And last, just respecting personal privacy and civil liberties. In the security space, in the government world, I've been lucky to work on both sides. We have different authorities, as does the Canadian government and other governments, to collect intelligence on foreign adversaries. And some of those civil liberties, when it's being used by hostile actors, go out the window, and we want to know about it. But when we apply that internally to our own country, it's important to remember that, the identity of a human being is different than intention. So an example of this could be, we don't want to use visual AI to recognize an individual by name, where they live, et cetera. You can certainly say, hey, there's a human being here that we're not identifying, but they're standing at a key location. This might be a security threat, and use AI in that standpoint. So what I would call that is, in my old job, we'd talk about pattern of life and understanding, kind of where people are, where are they going, for a variety of reasons. And there's a way to anonymize that. We don't have to know who they are, but we can anonymize that pattern of life to see if it fits profiles that may be of threats or potential threats to others. So walk that line, respect civil liberties, not always because we have to, but because we should. And there's still a lot of value that we can get out of that to help keep people safe.
Thank you so much. And so, Charles, you gave some great example how AI can be a powerful tool, but what about the human factor in all of this?
Well, actually, this is where I will bring in a little bit of a legal framework to the discussion, and prove to you that I actually am a lawyer. So many of you in the room may be familiar with GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation that protects privacy law in Europe. And what's interesting about that law is it's a privacy law. It's about data protection. It sets constraints on the use of personal information. But one of the initial motivating factors of GDPR was to promote the free flow of data across borders within the European Union and outside of the European Union in any country that could demonstrate that it had put in place an adequate level of protection of that personal information. And the idea was, let's have a basic high watermark of high standards, high levels of protection of that personal information. And then if everybody respects that, well, then you're good. You can the data can flow freely. I think we're starting to be in a little bit of a similar scenario with AI. In order for countries, for citizens, for society to become comfortable with the safe use of artificial intelligence, I believe and we're starting to see that this is the case, it's going to be necessary to set a level playing field of relatively high standards of accountability in accordance with some core principles that say, okay, so long as we meet those principles and we do it in a way that we're accountable if we go wrong, then we can actually feel safe that we're using this information, this technology safely. So with the EU AI Act, what they've done is they've adopted a risk-based approach to the regulation of AI systems. And Canada, by the way, intends to do something similar with the AI and Data Act. And in Europe, there are certain systems that are judged to be so high risk that they should be prohibited. They're not allowed. So state surveillance of social behavior, like you have in China, that's going to be illegal in Europe. So there are about 5 or 6 uses of AI that are just outright illegal. They will be prohibited. But in the second category, and this is the more interesting one potentially, it's what are referred to as high-risk AI systems. And those are AI systems that could have an adverse impact on health and safety or on fundamental rights. So think about product liability law, and if you're in a car and it's dangerous, or if you're in a plane or a medical device and they're dangerous, that can have an impact on your health and safety. Similarly, if there are AI systems that are, if they're going to determine whether I get a job, whether I get out of jail, that are going to have an impact on my fundamental rights, those should be regulated. And so those high impact systems are subject to a whole range of responsible AI governance obligations. And again, accountability, transparency, being transparent about the fact that you're interacting with a machine and not with a person. Explainability. If this machine is going to make a decision that's going to have an impact on my life, I need to know what were the factors and parameters that led to the outcome that we're talking about. Reliability. Okay, these things hallucinate, right? These things, they just make stuff up. I was going to use a different word, but then anyway. So how can we be reassured that if it's going to be making decisions, the decisions are reliable, that we can count on them? How can we be sure that the self-driving car doesn't drive me into a tree, right? And then security and privacy is another core theme. But I think that, and by the way, humans in the loop, humans always in the decision-making process, humans always ultimately accountable for the outcomes that are being rendered. And I'll just throw one little last loop on this. Some of this stuff is really challenging, right? And we're seeing, for instance, in the war in Ukraine, lethal autonomous weapon systems. We're seeing the use of drones massively, right? So are we getting to a place, and there's going to be a huge temptation on the edges, right, to allow machines to work in ways that are autonomous and without the control of the human who's supposed to be making some ethical decisions about what's safe and what's not safe?
Yeah, I think that the French language got it right in putting it intelligence artificielle. You got to put the intelligence first. You have to put the people first in the context of the decision making. And from a structure of the data or how it's set up or where it resides, at the end of the day, it's all zeros and ones until human beings get to interpret and provide insights to that. So context is absolutely important. The location and how it happens within the context is very important. Human beings need to be part of the process to continue to resolve and find those insights. And I think the important part of it is, and I'll say it in Canada and I'll say it abroad as well, Canada plays an interesting and unique role in being that bridge culturally with all of the different cultures that have found their way here to interpret it in such a way where GDPR is as, I guess, available and similar to the Canadian context as any other place in Europe. But maybe a little bit closer to Europe than what the US would evaluate it as. So I think there's a real opportunity, again, as kind of this functional pragmatist, to see the value of structuring it in such a way, allowing the machines to do the work that they're meant to do in a binary way, but absolutely never lose sight of the people part of it, the intelligence first, and the artificial second. This is a machine that is enabling us, not one that will ever wish to replace us.
And I'm thinking, what's happening in France with the Olympic. Like, would you have a current example maybe to provide with such a big event and how you protect privacy?
Yeah, it just again on our national broadcast or on the radio, kind of on the drive back from somewhere to somewhere else yesterday, was the context around the French government actually rewriting some laws and basically making this surveillance available for the course of the Olympics. But then the questions start to fold and resolve into it as to, okay, well, we have to maintain privacy. We have to remain anonymity. We have to do it for this moment of time where we're going to allow ourselves to surveil. But then as they unpack that, they see that there is value to have it 18 months after the Olympics to see how the software reacted, to see how the trends were able to be informed for the next big event. So I think for
apparently income tax was going to be a temporary measure. It didn't turn out that way.
Exactly. But I think that the point to be made is that there's going to be these instances and moments where there's going to have to be this human gut check, that moment that then takes us to the step change evolution. And will the machines at that point enable us? But I mean, the French government, I don't know if it's a coincidence that they're up for an election the next day after I hear this great news of what's going on with the surveillance. But all kidding aside, the idea of learning from these instances and then figuring out how to, again, keep that a moment of a machine that's done this algorithm that then allows for the step change to something else. It's happening quite fast. So there's a lot of monitoring and managing in a lot of different countries.
Exactly. I think technology is evolving so rapidly that every opportunity is a learning opportunity to learn and assess and see what the next step is. So, Dr. Fatih, like maybe a point of view from you leading the Aldo group, like what do you think of the human factor in all of this?
Yes, we want to create human-centered AI. And as human beings, obviously play an important role in creation of that. The ethical oversight, and also all the education around how the AI should be used and how it should be leveraged and how it shouldn't be used, really. So at the Aldo Group, we created our own guidelines and the policies to ensure that we have a responsible way of using AI. From research perspective, it's also important to know that many of these AI algorithms are super complicated. For instance, ChatGPT has more than 1 trillion of parameters. Makes it very complicated for human beings to understand what happens behind the scene. We need researchers to start to make these things a bit more transparent, make it such that we can interpret what happens behind the scene. That is a key area of the research, and in Montreal, we have a lot of bright minds that are working specifically on this subject, including Ivaro and Mila. There's also the trust and the communication aspect. We want to create trust between humans and artificial intelligence. And for that, we need to make sure that we can communicate the outcomes accordingly. We can also align business objectives and human objectives with whatever we try to achieve with the AI as well. And as my co-panelist rightly said, the transparency and accountability is very important. We need to have accountability at multiple different levels of organizations, also at the individual level.
Now, I would love from you all to speak about the challenges and opportunity for effective crisis mitigation and bolster resilience in the face of escalating risk. And Charles, perhaps you can share your thoughts more on international governance. What do you think?
So when I started to prepare for this, I asked a couple of associates in our law firm to help prepare and find some examples of the use of AI systems to help decision making in the context of crises situations. And I think it's not entirely surprising that all of the examples they came up with were related to the climate crisis. I think that's the generation, the younger generation, is worried about the climate crisis. So let me give a couple of examples. I have 10 or 15, but anyway, I'll give you a couple of examples and then unpack some of the themes that I think flow from them. First of all, the first example of AI at the international level dealing with an international crisis. There's some technology called UNet developed out of the University of Leeds that uses satellite imagery AI systems that track changes in icebergs. And they can measure those changes 10,000 times faster than any human can to get a sense of the impact on climate change over time. The second example is out of Germany, a system that is being used to predict weather patterns. So extremely complex data sets, a huge amount of data. And that information is being used for, not only to think about how countries can adapt to climate change issues, but also thinking about developing strategies for communities that are vulnerable to climate change, such as Burundi, Chad, and Sudan. But also, think about a private sector example. Insurers are trying to figure out what's the impact of the climate change scenarios on their business model and their risk evaluation. And one of the things that struck me as I was thinking about this example is as powerful as these tools are, they're only as powerful as our ability to trust the outcome, right? And so at the same time that there's almost a universal consensus amongst the scientific community on climate change, we're also being confronted by misinformation. We're being confronted by a lack of trust. We're being confronted by situations of informational asymmetry. Some people have access to incredible amounts of resources and tools and education, and they have a lot of information. Other people are feeling like they are floundering, like the world is happening to them, like these choices are happening to them. They don't feel the sense of agency, and they're angry about that, and it's understandable. So I think education is going to be a key feature. As I say, some of the core principles that I've talked about are all in terms of responsible AI governance. They're all about helping people to deserve that trust. So that notion of accountability, somebody is accountable if something goes wrong. Transparency, I am understanding when I'm dealing with a machine. Explainability, I do know what are the factors that are going into that decision-making process. Privacy and security, my data is secured. All of these factors are going into, and reliability, right? Like on these examples, they've measured billions of data points, and the outcomes are actually pretty compelling. And so I think that's a key feature as well.
Well, actually, Andrew, can you speak a little bit about how real-time data can support, navigating into those challenges?
No, absolutely. And I think the question was framed in kind of the opportunity and the challenge. So absolutely, those same young people from our industry, the opportunity through AI is to point the power in the right direction at the right time to service these chips that are just absolutely starved for more energy. So on a sustainability mandate, the idea of reducing our power consumption to the point where the most important questions are being answered with the most specific amount of power to that particular moment. So we feel like we're on the right side of that one. Where it becomes challenging is just the massive amounts of data that has to be processed. I mean, we're talking exponential data being processed and then being demanded in the near real time, if not real time, at a specific location with context. And nobody in the education or the military field has been able to figure out how to make the speed of light to go any faster. So the location of those moments of data, those insights that need to be drawn have to be basically pushed towards as close to where the edge of that is happening. So I think that's the ultimate challenge, is just the massive processing power that's going to be required to create those insights, but then make it available at an instant when that decision has to be made. And even though the environment has been a slow-moving train towards all of us, humanity hasn't quite been able to wake up to it. I can't imagine the split-second decisions that have to be made in a moral context in a field of combat, and then having that moment to trust whether the tools in front of you are biased in some way or haven't shown up with the right data, let alone have an internet lag that doesn't allow it to give it to you when you need it. I mean, to me, that's a profound challenge that would keep me up at night if I was in a different industry.
Yeah, actually, Chad, would you have some use case to share with us?
Not publicly, but you're right on the money. I'll keep it brief. Two things to kind of piggyback off of the real-time information. It's also, how do you craft the output? It has to be digestible. We're talking about numbers with an incredible amount of zeros, and I can't use that joke a third time, so I apologize. But it's massive. But then how do you distill it down into a digestible format that people can use and trust, right? And so we talked a little bit about large language models being able to do that, specialized large language models, not more general ones, which certainly have their purpose and use case. And then with trust, I would counter, and that's not really a counter, but just something to think about. The best way to earn trust is to be trustworthy. And I think that goes not just for governments, but also for the technology that is being utilized when you're in those split-second decisions and have to make decisions based on the data that you have or the technology that you have. So certainly sourcing, the ability to pull on this string, and although this is nice and digestible, if I want to look underneath and dig a bit more, the lineage of that data is there, so I can see the sourcing as I build up that trust. So be trustworthy and have the ability for the user to be able to unpack that succinct answer to get to the raw data that's feeding it.
Thank you. And Dr. Fatih, you did mention it when we were preparing for this panel. It all comes back to trust. So can you elaborate about that?
Yes, decision making, and we're talking about times that we need resiliency. We need systems that help us to maneuver through all these criticalities. And there are many examples that our friends explained. Some of them are including using AI in disaster response, for instance, during the hurricanes and the earthquakes. There has been AI applications for the public health. For instance, the Blue Dots AI could anticipate COVID-19 before it was, widely reported. Looking at all the challenges, but there are a lot of opportunities ahead that we need to anticipate and we need to leverage.
I could just, because I realized there was an important principle that I didn't mention, and it goes also to the core of the trust issue, and that is the fairness and non-discrimination principle. Because one of the big concerns that we've seen historically is that AI systems that are trained on historical data can sometimes and often just amplify the bias that's already existing in the data. So, and a lot of very good research happening here in Montreal on this topic. How do you ensure the readiness of the data? How do you ensure that the data is representative of the people or the scenarios or the situation that you're trying to address? But that's a key component of responsible AI governance is ensuring that you address the risk of discrimination.
Garbage in, garbage out.
Exactly.
So we have about a minute left, and I would love for you to share with everyone here maybe one tip that you want everyone to do as a next step to make good decision based on data, based on trust, based on everything that you have done. So in no particular order, the last word for today.
Learn. I mean, I think you'll see on your teams there are varying levels of familiarity with AI. We're in a transitional period. Everything you can do, the old adage of build the ark before the storm. Try to help to initiate that education at all levels so people better understand that tool, how to use it responsibly. That would be my tip for the panel today.
So you have heard this before, I guess. It's like AI is not going to replace human beings. Hopefully not. So that's we exactly don't know. But AI, the people that are going to be using AI are going to be replacing the ones that they're not using it. We need to really embrace it and look at the opportunities that this can bring to the table.
I think we need to embrace the notion of ourselves as individuals, as agent. We have to embrace our agency and understand that if we're not thinking in agile ways, if we are not actively participating in shaping how we are using the technology, we may well be used by the technology. And that's going to require a lot of, it's lifelong learning, it's adaptability, and all the rest of it. But we have to learn to put ourselves and to make choices, because this is a situation where the technology is so powerful. We will all be confronted by ethical situations. We will all be confronted by situations where there's a line that may be crossed, and thinking in advance about what that line is and where those issues are of concern, and understanding what it means to be human, and understanding what role we have to play in making sure that we are the agent using the technology for our benefit.
I'm left profoundly optimistic and encouraged by 4 diverse panelists coming to humanity as the landing point for the discussion. We talk a lot about change management and the inevitability of change, but change management is people management, right? It's about the people understanding the context that in turn then doesn't have it as us versus them, kind of people versus machine. It's us humans getting together and embracing the technology then to make the advancements that a good society wants to advance. So from my perspective, it's assume positive intent, get the machines working for us, and advance like we have for societies before us.
Thank you very much.